Good evening, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Jen Hovland's first experience with parliamentary procedure was at a formal military assembly. Without knowing Parli Pro, she was shut out of participating in the meeting and just became a spectator. Those who know Jen knows that she likes to participate. As a Parli Pro nerd, Jen knows that not everyone has a passion for this fairly dry subject. Today, her goal is to provide you with information in a fun and interactive way to help you become a participant instead of a spectator at formal meetings. Please welcome Jen Hovland.
Thank you, Katie, for that wonderful introduction. Parliamentary procedure can be quite dry, boring. It's a book, about an inch thick if you really want to read through it. But probably the easiest way to understand parliamentary procedure is to have the chart of motions. Now, the reason why we have parliamentary procedure is because then you have a set of rules that you can conduct meetings, allowing everyone to be heard and decisions made without confusion. So if you have a set of rules that everybody agrees on at the beginning of the meeting, you're not going to have confusion. The more people involved with the meeting, more important it is. There are 5 types of motions, which is the second column in the chart of motions. And they are main motions, which you're used to hearing, I motion, I move, that get something started for a vote. Privileged motions, those are items that are urgent and important, but unrelated to the current business under hand. Subsidiary motions, they affect the change of how a main motion is handled or voted upon. Incidental motions provides a means of questioning the procedure concerning motions and how it can be considered. And then when you bring back to the assembly, those are things that were previously considered or AKA voted on. So those are the 5 types of motions. There are certain motions that can be done when interrupting the speaker, but do know that we do want to have some positive collaboration going on. Just because you can doesn't mean it's always polite, but if you need to interrupt the speaker, there's only certain types of motions that you can do that with. Most motions require a second to continue on. There's a few that do not. Some motions can be amended for clarification or improvement. And then there's some motions that can be discussed, or as in this column puts it, as debatable. And then when they require a vote, there's some that's a majority, and that's just a simple 1/2 is a simple majority vote. And then the others require a 2/3 vote. And that is of the assembly. That is of the group that is present, of your quorum. Of course, you hope you have quorum before you have any meetings. And that's why there are so many times we need to make sure people are registered before meetings. Before we really get into the fun part, I'm just going to explain some of these points. I know they're really kind of tiny as an eye chart on the Zoom meeting, but that is available as a handout of what types of motions are. The first one on this list, I actually got this from TI's website, of course, is fix a time in which to adjourn. Everybody knows what the adjournment means, but when you have a fixed time, you're on a schedule and you have a certain amount of time that you're going to end. But not only do you have the certain time you have an end, you have a start time of where you're going to pick this meeting back up. So that is something that can be voted on. It's a privileged motion to be taken care of. If you notice on the chart of motions, it does mention that the first 13 are in order of precedence. So if something is farther down, the higher up in the schedule, that takes precedence. I apologize if you hear my dog barking in the background. He's not happy. Adjournment, we know. Recess, we understand what that means. Raise a question of privilege. So this is one of those questions where you're asking for the rights of members. So one of the options could be, is like when you're in a big meeting room and you would grab the attention of the speaker and say that we can't hear you in the back of the room. So that way they know to hear it. Anymore on Zoom, we just say, are you still on mute? It's a little bit different trying to do Parli Pro over a Zoom meeting, I would admit that. Calls for the order of the day, that is saying, okay, stick to your agenda. We have an agenda set out ahead of time. We've agreed upon this agenda. Now we need to stay with it. The lay on the table is kind of a way to say, all right, we're going to bring this up later. So let's go ahead and just pass that down. We're going to lay this on the table. So like, here's my question. I'm going to lay it down over here so we can move on to this next question. That's what lay on the table means. It means that motions we're not going to vote on at this time. Previous question. So what it could be is you'll hear I move the previous question, or I move we vote immediately. Some people even call it call the question. It's a way to end debate or the discussion that may be going downhill or not achieving anything. So therefore, when you do close the or call the question, you are getting the vote out there. So that make sure that we finish up on the motion that we are working on. Excuse me. You could also postpone for something for a certain time. I know I'm skipping over a few of these, but I want to make sure we have some time. Some of these really explains themselves. But this is when you say, I move the question to be proposed till the next meeting. So that means that you're still going to talk about this item, but you've moved it to a different time to actually discuss it again. It's a good way to say, okay, we're not going anywhere farther on this. Let's move it to another time to look at it, or we need to get other business done to do this. For an example, a few years ago, when we had a contested election, they needed to have time to vote, to count the votes for the ballot votes for club growth director. So they basically they postponed it. So that way we can move on to the elections of the division directors. And then when they came back with the count, we brought it back and it was announced. And then we moved back on to where we were at. That's a way to keep us from having to sit and wait until votes are counted, or if something else has to be taken precedence ahead of time. Refer to committee. This is a common one that you may see is we made a motion, but something needs further discussion. We need someone else to look at it, or even a proposal's made. Hey, why don't we try this? All right, let's make a committee to look on that outside of what we're at now, because we're not going to get that information completed right now. Amendments, we're familiar with amendments. There's one that you could actually postpone indefinitely. And this is where you say, I moved that the motion be postponed indefinitely. Or if you're in South Dakota, you may hear about things being moved to the 41st day of session. We only have 40 days of legislation session in South Dakota. So if they move to postpone to the 41st day, they effectively kind of killed that for that session. Just one way that could be taken care of. We understand motions, point of order, just make sure we're following our order. We understand appeals. One that's kind of an interesting one is if you do a suspension of rules. So you're going to set aside something for a little bit. It's temporarily. So for example, I move to suspend the rules which interfere with considering the motion to hold a get acquainted happy hour for a few new members. I don't know how many people would actually do that in a formal meeting, but it might happen. But if you're going to suspend the rules of the actual Roberts of Rules for a certain reason, you explain why you're going to do it. There is the division of a question, and that allows you to vote on each part of the motion separately. So if you're going to divide the motion into questions, for example, you're putting on a convention, you're going to vote on how much you are going to spend on this and what you're going to do here and what you're going to do there. Instead of having it all in one big motion, you're going to divide it into 3 different groups and vote on each one individually. So that's the divide the question. Or you could also do the same thing by consider by paragraph. So therefore you don't have to go through and approve the whole thing. You can have a discussion on each separate little thing and then have a final motion and a vote. For example, if you're discussing budgets, maybe there's just a certain part of the budget that needs to be discussed and then tweaked and then move on through, and then you could approve it as a whole. A division of the assembly, or I call for division, excuse me, that is where you actually call for a vote, not just an aye or nay vote. You are actually calling for raising hands, written ballot, something like that. You're actually wanting to make sure that you get the real count of the vote, not this whoever is the loudest. One thing that's not listed on here for the incidental motions is the withdrawal motion. You have a very, very slim possibility where you have a chance that you can withdraw your motion. And it's between the time of when you make the motion, even if it gets seconded before the chairperson says, okay, we have this motion. Once that's read out, you can no longer withdraw it. But it's such a small little window. If you can say, I make a motion, and then you change your mind before you get a second, you can still withdraw your motion. So that is something, it's not listed on the TI's chart of motions, but that is a motion that you can do according to Robert's rules. The motions that bring the question back to the assembly is you could rescind a motion that was previously adopted. So therefore, you could basically bring back and say, okay, we originally adopted this, but we want to change it. So you got to bring it back to the assembly so that you can go ahead and maybe you need to amend it or you need to discuss it more. That's one way to do it. Another option is to reconsider. The big key when it comes to reconsider, it can only be brought, the motion can only be brought by a member on the vote who voted on the prevailing side. So if the prevailing side was to kill something, only someone who voted to kill it could actually bring it back, if that makes any sense. Another one that's not listed on here, they mentioned lay on the table, but they forget to bring back the fact that you could take from the table. So that's how you bring it back to be reconsidered and to be voted on. One of the handouts that's being shared shows the order of how motions are presented and how they can be voted on. And it's a very step-by-step type thing. I'm just going to go quickly with the top 7 points, but you want to obtain the floor, make your motion, wait for someone to second your motion. And if the motion, there isn't someone who makes the second, then the chair will call for a second. The chair will then state the motion, and that will give it a chance to amend or expand the motion, bring the debate, the discussion. And then the 7th point is where you ask the question or you vote on it. And when you do vote, there's 5 different ways. You could vote by voice, which you're probably really familiar with. It's the most common. All in favor say aye, all opposed say nay, or same sign. However, the person who wants to use the word to do it. By roll call, where each person has to answer yes or no individually based off roll call. There's general consent, and that's where you've probably, if you were on the meeting Tuesday night, you probably saw if there's no objection. So that's calling general consent unless one person objects. If someone objects, then we have to go back to a regular vote. But by general consent is a great way to get meetings going that, you know, you're really not going to get someone who say no against it. Like if it's going to be approving the minutes. By division, again, that's the slight variation of the voice vote where you're required to count unless so the members raise their hands or they stand. And then of course there's by ballot if you need to do something by secret ballot. Just a reminder that Parli Pro or parliamentary procedure is the best way to get things done at your meeting, but it only works if you work it properly. Allow motions that are in order, have members obtain the floor properly, not just jumping up and yelling, speak clearly and concisely, and obey the rules of debate. And most importantly, be courteous to each other. Now we're going to move into an example meeting. I hope everybody has their display so that they can see the screen as well as the videos on the side, because I have some fellow club members that are going to help me put on a role play. And by a role play, you can actually see the motions in order. We're going to have a little bit of fun with it. So I'm going to introduce 3 of my club members, Ulrika Dosdahl, Lindsay Hayes, and Derek Zomer, who have agreed to play along with me. So this is going to be a committee meeting. And most time when we do committee meetings in a small group, you may not be doing Parli Pro, but this is just a good way to show how it works, all in order. We're going to go ahead and start at the meeting, and there's going to be occasional times that I'm going to pause the meeting and I'll explain, we'll discuss what they're doing right or wrong, and if they're doing something wrong, how it will be corrected. So we'll start with the chair opening the meeting.
I call to order this committee meeting of USD Area Yap and Yotes 504-2390 for our summer picnic. I see everyone is here, so we can continue.
All right, I'm going to pause them here right now. Can you guess why he's on pause? It's item 2. It's called roll call. When roll call is on the agenda, you must call for an actual roll call of each person on your committee. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and rewind back to the beginning of the meeting and let the chair start again.
I call to order this committee meeting of USD Area Yap and Yotes 504-2390 for our summer picnic. Ulrika, can you please do roll call?
Sure. Derek Zomer,
Here.
Lindsay Hayes,
Here.
and I, Ulrika Dosdahl, am here.
All right, before we continue, are there any changes needed to the agenda?
I'll move to strike approval of minutes from the last meeting, as this is our first meeting.
Then strike old business too.
And we're going to pause right there. Why do you suppose that we paused? There's already a motion on the table, and therefore the motion needs to be seconded and before any discussion or amendments can move forward. Okay, we're going to go back to the motion.
I move to strike approval of minutes from the last meeting, as this is our first meeting for this event.
I second.
Any discussion?
I raise a question of privilege. It's really warm in here. Can I go turn down the heat?
We will wait while you adjust the thermostat.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause it right there. The question of privilege can be done at any time, even though it does not relate to the motion or the discussion on the floor. Okay, we're going to continue on and discuss the agenda.
I would like to add to old business, A, discuss last year's event and add to new business, D, invite more committee members, and E, next meeting date. Can I get a motion?
Going to pause it right there again. Why can't Derek just change the agenda? It's his meeting. As it goes with parliamentary procedure, you already have a published agenda that everybody is looking at. So therefore you have to go by the published agenda and you have to make motions when you are going to change it. But as this is Derek's meeting, he cannot make the motion. So he properly was asking for someone else to make that motion. Okay, we will resume where we left off.
I will move to add to old business and new business as Derek described.
I second.
All right, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Any other changes to the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda with approved changes.
I'll second.
All right, well, if there is no objection, we will move on to old business.
Okay, we're gonna hold right here. We have approved to change the agenda, so now here's our amended agenda. Point 4 was stricken by one of the amendments. Well, they've already talked about last year's event. We don't need to discuss that right here. It doesn't pertain to Parli Pro. So we're gonna go ahead and pick up the meeting back up at point 6A.
In past years, we have had the picnics on Thursday nights, and I have been unable to attend. I know that no night is going to work for everyone, but as being on the committee, I would like to try a different night.
We could possibly look at a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, but weekends are so busy during the summer and so many people have so many different activities.
Well, then I move that the question be postponed until our next meeting after we can get some feedback from our other club members.
We're gonna pause it right there. The wording is very important. The question be postponed. Like I discussed earlier, we're postponing the question to the next meeting so we could get some more feedback before we can make a good decision. So before we would set a date that only these 3 can attend, we're going to find out from other people and have the discussion at the next meeting. Let's see here. This is different than laying the question on the table, because when you lay the question on the table, it gets picked right back up in the same meeting. So again, that's why the wording is very important, that we are postponing the question. Now our committee picks back up on 6B.
I propose a contest to decide who gets to cook. Each person can earn points by doing specific things at the meeting, and the person with the least points cooks.
I would move to refer the contest to the executive board for approval before we report that to the club.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and pause back there. Couple points here. First of all, the comment was proposed. It was not a motion, so therefore Ulrika doing another motion is not a problem. If you do want to purposely have a motion, you need to say I move or I motion before you start with your statement. Now, as far as what was being referred to committee is what Ulrika did by voting, asking to move to the exec board, which is a committee. She stated that the committee is going to deal with just the contest part. If you listen to the way she said that, her words is, I move to refer the contest to the exec board for approval. That's all she asked about, not about who cooks or what we're going to do here. If that passes, then the committee could still talk about other things of how who cooks, but just not that contest aspect of it. Who knows? Maybe the suggestion of who cooks will turn out better now that the contest is off the table. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to point 6C.
I move to have a beer pong and cake stand.
Lindsay, my cat's gonna be there. That's kind of cute. That should. Well, I guess I maybe move to have a frisbee toss, but point of order, there's already a motion on the floor by Lindsay. We cannot have another motion or discussion until we have closure on Lindsay's motion. Is there a second?
I'm gonna go ahead and pause there. Thank you, Derek, for filling in for our role player that looked like she had to step away there. Since there was one motion, Derek, as being the chair or anybody, can choose point of order. So if you call point of order, you need to bring it back to where you're at. And Derek did just great as the chair, bringing the point of order that there was already a motion on the table. So he's going to have to continue on to request if there's a second of a motion, whether he agrees or disagrees with the motion that is being proposed. Thank you. After waiting for a moment to get a second, Derek then continues.
All right, well, hearing no second, I guess, the motion is dropped.
And I'm going to go ahead and pause there again. This is the slight little window I told you about where you could withdraw your motion. So if Lindsay wanted to, when she was hearing crickets of nobody else or seeing people's response to her motion, she could have chose to withdraw the motion. But if there would have been a second and Derek says, okay, there was a motion on the floor to have beer pong and keg stands, then it has to go to a vote. She can't withdraw the motion anymore. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and we've discussed points D and E. We're gonna move on to closing the meeting.
I move to adjourn.
Well, I think I'm gonna second it. And so I will see you all at the next meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna pause. Technically, that second was supposed to be on Ulrika, but that's all right. Thank you, Derek, for filling it. But what's missing? If you have a motion and a second, Derek can't just say, all right, let's see you next meeting. We are required to vote. So we'll go ahead and redo that motion. Lindsay will move to adjourn. Ulrika will second. And then Derek will ask us.
All in favor, say pineapple.
Pineapple.
Opposed, same sign. All right, meeting adjourned.
Okay, note on that pineapple. Yes, you can use any word you want when you're sharing the meeting. Of course, I and nay are the most common, most businesslike. But if you want to spice up your meeting, you can put in extra words out there, but be very careful. I was at an event with a bunch of 20 to 40-year-olds. Some of you might know what that organization might have been back a few years ago, where the chair was trying to keep the meeting upbeat. And so when he went to go to move to adjourn, he says, those in favor say, I don't remember what the first in favor was. And then those opposed say beer. Well, what do you say when a bunch of 20 to 40-year-olds hear beer? They all repeat beer really loud. It was a louder voice of the vote than to adjourn. So therefore we had to reconsider and do a division of the vote, so raise of hands, to be able to adjourn our meeting. So if you do want to have fun with using, instead of ayes and nays, use pineapple, pizza, whatever you want to have fun with the meeting. Just be careful that you're going to get the response that is more appropriate to what you're doing. I want to thank my actors for participating in that very active role play. As you can tell, we have a little bit of fun in our club. We will now open it up for questions.
Yes, I invite anyone who has questions to please enter any that you have in the chat, or you may raise your hand and I will call on you. And I see Carl, you have a question?
Jen, I had heard once that if you have an approved agenda and you have completed all the items on your agenda, you don't necessarily need a motion to adjourn. Is that correct? Or have you heard anything about that?
No, adjournment, if we go back to that chart of motions, let me get back to that page. Adjournment always needs to have a motion and a second. There's no, it's not amendable, it's not debatable, and you do have to have a majority vote.
I have no idea where I heard that from, but if you've completed your agenda, there's really no more business that can take place, so the meeting is over. But I understand where you're coming from.
That's just so, again, you're trying to get everybody on consensus and they all agree that the meeting's over and that nothing else needs to be discussed.
Thank you.
All
Well,
right.
usually that's a good point of where you could say, if there is no objection, that's another way to get your vote in.
Usually adjournment's not too bad. No one's gonna
Unless
argue
you end with fear.
that.
There is another question. Who determines how you would vote on something?
Primarily, it's a voice vote. If someone calls for a division, then of course, then it'd be the raise of hands. If your policies and procedures or your bylaws require you to have roll call votes, because there are certain organizations that do have roll call votes in an exec board that each officer role has to give their yes, no vote, or if you need a private ballot. So it depends on what you're looking for as to which way the vote is. And again, that is described a little bit more on that handout.
And should it always be established on the agenda how you plan to vote? Or not?
You can, again, that makes it a little bit more formal. You could put on there that 4 votes are going to be ayes, nay votes, against opposed votes are going to be nay. Just kind of, you listen to the way the chair wants to hold it. So if the chair says all in favor, say aye, all opposed, same sign. There's, again, if you get a bunch of 20 to 40-year-olds that have been drinking, they'll all say same sign, or they may just all say aye.
All right, thank you. And there's another, if a motion is withdrawn within that period, does it, or should it be included in meeting minutes, or does it just kind of completely get washed away?
That is the one way it gets erased, is being
Okay.
withdrawn.
I wouldn't have erased your suggestion, Lindsay. I really liked it. And I have another. What language is best to use if you're interrupting with a privileged motion? If, for example, you aren't somewhere where you could stand or be seen or noticed?
You would call out, say, dear chair, Mr. Chairperson, Madam President, whatever it is, get the person who's running the meeting's attention.
Okay.
And then once they call upon you that they've been seen, then you move forward.
And just a reminder, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand.
I could have really bored everybody to death and defined every single one, but that's no fun.
Because you turned down my motion for the beer.
My cat's gonna be there, Lindsay. I can't have that.
Oh, Percy.
Jen, is there any type of Parli Pro for dummies, as we have read many books before? And what I'm thinking about is when we go into club officer training or looking at something like that, are there simple ways to try and get that across, at least for club council meetings, other type of meetings, so people can follow some kind of order?
That's why this chart of motions is phenomenal. Well, the first time I learned about Parli Pro happened to be in that young adult organization. And I understood then why I got shut down from my military meetings. I was taught by someone who actually deals with this all the time because he's part of a union. And he just brought in a simple chart of motions that says, as long as you follow the chart of motions and you're respectful to everybody, you're meeting Parli Pro.
Okay.
The more people you have in a meeting, the more people that need to be heard, the more pauses you need, the more strict you need to be. You may even have to set timelines. But for the most part, using the chart of motions, you're going to get everything that you need.
All right, I do have another question. Are you able to bring up the scenario again that your team worked through? Like the example thing, do you still have that up?
What do you mean, my agenda?
Yeah, yep, the meeting agenda,
Okay.
if it's not hard. I can describe it too, but there was the point where Lindsay made that motion, but the group was really discussing like what we should do for activities. Is there room for just like a brainstorming discussion, or does every idea have to be a motion?
No, if it was, I propose, or what if we did this, but as soon as you say, I move, or I motion, you're pushing it out there to be voted on.
And if the team wasn't ready to make a decision and they voted no, but then later in discussion they wanted to do it again, could someone raise that as a motion again, or is it like lost?
If it's been withdrawn, it can be brought back later. If it didn't get its second, falls on its face, no, it can't be brought back.
Okay.
At least not for that committee meeting. If it went to a different committee meeting, maybe.
You'd have to dress it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Beer pong and bowling or something.
Yeah.
Any other questions from our audience or anyone in the group?
If anybody does have more questions, there's my email address that you can reach out to me. I am kind of a Parli Pro nerd. I really fell in love with understanding how this was. And when you get people who don't know it and you can shut them out, it's fun. But if you don't know it and you don't want to be shut out, well, you better know it so you don't get shut out.
Well, Jen, I've got a question for your club mates. Is it really that tough at a club meeting? Are you a little hesitant to do something at a meeting, or is she the one that pops up and says, whoa, we need a motion on that?
Jen has definitely come in at times to say the motion is still on the floor. We have to talk through that, but she leads by example. So it's not that we ever feel that we are looked down on. If we're doing something out of Parli Pro, it's a slight small reminder. But most of our meetings run basically what you just saw.
Right. No, I bring that up because I think a lot of groups, a lot of clubs have that. I belong to a club that meets on Saturday mornings, and we were discussing, should we have our meeting this Saturday morning so everybody could attend contests and do those things? And that is exactly what happened. Well, if we're going to not meet, we need a motion, somebody to make a motion to bring that up. So you're not alone, Jen.
Well, just a little bit of experience on your shoulders, you kind of get asked the questions quite often. The big thing to remember is you don't really need motions on reports because you're not taking actions. And I notice sometimes some organizations, I haven't noticed that so much in Toastmasters, but some organizations, they want everybody to vote on everything. And I'm like, you're not taking action on a report. I mean, you do vote on minutes because you're going to be putting those in forward as part of your formal record. Granted, that's a report, but there's a chance to amend it. But if I'm just telling you what I've been working on, you can't vote me yes or no. I mean, that's what I've done. I can't change it. It's behind me.
Right.
I'm just sharing with you what I did. So reports don't need to be voted on. Only things that you really need to take motion on. And I know in our club, the biggest thing that I push to make sure is that we get vote when we have officer elections, how we're going to spend money, if we're changing something as far as our normal policies. But for the most part, most of our exec board meetings are just reports, so we don't need Parli Pro.
Thanks, Jen.
All right. Thank you for attending tonight's education session. And don't forget, we do have another set of speakers lined up starting at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central. And the hospitality room will also be opening at 9 p.m. Mountain Time, 10 p.m. Central. Please rejoin Laura Lobo and other Toastmasters and guests from across the district for a fun-filled session of Night Owls karaoke. To participate, you can RSVP under meetups in the community section of our conference website. Thank you and have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. I'm glad this is recorded because I'm glad it will have a chance for others to listen to it on their own time.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Great job, everyone.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Greg.